Welcome back to the Marvel Movie Minute, a daily podcast in which we explore the films of the Marvel Cinematic Universe 1 minute at a time. In this, our fourth season, we're looking at Kenneth Branagh's 2011 film, Thor. I'm Matthew Fox from theethicalpanda.com.
And I'm Andy Nelson from the Next Real Film Podcast.
And today we're talking about minute 31, which begins with our Earth friends realizing what they just did and ends with Jane agreeing that this strange man yelling at the sky just might need a hospital. Joining us this week, today and every day this week, we have Jay Shepard, the owner of the Marvel Cinematic Universe Location Scout. Welcome, Jay.
Hey, thanks very much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Us too. And I know you picked these minutes particularly because this is the hospital that we're going to be seeing some minutes in and stuff like that. So tell us a bit about what the Location Scout is and kind of what your interest in these locations is.
So MCU Location Scout started as a Google map and a Twitter account and just doing some write-ups on a site that I make movie reviews and do other posts on called retrozap.com. And sort of just became a way for me to look at the Netflix shows. I wanted to understand a little bit more about the place they were filmed, since I knew they all actually were filmed in New York City and the environs around there. And I kind of wanted to see what I could find by just watching the show and then utilizing Google Maps. And since then, I live near New York. I'm like 3 hours away in Maryland here. And so I've gone up a couple times to kind of drive around. But I am trying to make a repository of the filming locations and in-universe locations of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, from the movies to the TV shows. And so I keep meticulous notes and, see what other people have done and say, maybe that's not quite right, and look up stuff and just, use Google Maps and try to nail all this stuff down for fun.
It's a great website. I love, like I said, being able to find exactly where Steve's plane went down in the first Avenger. And as we said, because these minutes we're going to go through a couple of different locations. We'll definitely be talking, really looking forward to hearing your thoughts on that and awesome. So how they pick these places and stuff like that. And we'll get into all of that in just one moment.
Thor has finally made it back to Midgard, aka Earth. We're going to be talking about this over in our Discord chat room this week. We'd love to have you get in on the conversation with us. We have a growing group of Marvel fans just waiting for you to join the conversation in our Discord server. Head to truestory.fm/Marvel Movie Minute and click on the Discord link.
So we start out kind of watching the same 30 seconds that we've seen before in terms of leading up to that question that took us back into all the flashbacks from Jane of, where did he come from? What was it like for you all, like kind of watching these scenes now a second time, now that we know everything we do from those 20 minutes about Thor?
Well, it's an interesting rehashing of the moment, I guess, I'll say, because we're getting more detail than we did before. I mean, it's interesting because the crash itself, like they kind of squeezed that down to kind of just in shorthand give us a sense of where we were again. But now that we're back, it's like everything is much better lit, and we can actually see who this person is that she's looking at now, instead of kind of the mysterious shadow figure that we had at the beginning. And earlier we didn't have that 10-second stare between Thor and Jane as they kind of looked into each other's eyes. And it was very short, and the whole thing was brief. And now we actually get that connection. And so I actually kind of appreciate that we are seeing it again, but now we're getting a little more we have a more emotional investment with it because we know who this person is now. And so for me, I think that it was effectively done.
Typical film timeline kind of stuff where they kind of cheat you in the first viewing of it, and then when you come back, it looks like exactly like you saw it before, but it's not.
Right. Yeah, because you have new information, now you're understanding where they're coming from, and it's really great when you see it. And so the first thing they do is they jump out of the vehicle, which is a Pinzgauer, which we're going to talk about in 1 second. But Jay, I want to first by asking, have you ever done any research into kind of like where the vehicles from these shows wind up? Or is that outside of... Because I've seen the actual DeLorean from Back to the Future, but no one's ever told me where the Pinzgauer wound up.
No, I do not. Though when I do some of my write-ups, I do not like just to say, the gray car or the blue van or whatever. So I did find that there is an Internet Movie Database for cars on the web. I think it's called the Internet Movie Car Database. Somebody's already kind of done this. That's right. If I can find it on the internet, I don't really like to redo something somebody else has done. Nobody was doing like a straight just MCU filming location site. You know, it was always mixed in with other stuff. But I'm not necessarily a car guy myself, so.
Well, I think one of us may have looked at that website a bit. Andy, do you want to tell us a bit about this Pinzgauer?
There's that site. There's the Internet Movie Firearms Database. There are so many of these. I think we had at one point referenced one for like aircraft or other flying vehicles. So yeah, people love pinpointing very specific things, and it's very helpful that they exist because it allows us to have a resource to kind of dig into these sorts of things. Yes, we are looking at this Pinzgauer from 1971. It's the Steyr-Puch, I guess is how you pronounce that. Pinzgauer. It's a high mobility all-terrain vehicle. You know, I mean, they're great and they're very high off the ground, so that, I mean, we've seen them driving through all over the desert so far, and so it makes sense that they're up so high because you need that. But they're a vehicle that had been made in Austria, and they were very popular with the military for a long time. And but yeah, for purposes of things like this, it makes sense for these scientists to say, hey, let's get one of these things that we can then use and adapt for our research that we're doing out in the New Mexico desert.
It's one of those things where I want to dive deep and try to think about the significance of it and the German scientist who's with them, but then also think that it may have just been that Kenneth Branagh said, okay, get me the closest vehicle that rides pretty high that a scientist might use. And this was what they had on the lot somewhere in New Mexico.
Right. Although, and then I would say he's a Swedish scientist,
that's correct. That's correct.
That's right. But I mean, it is fair to say, I mean, it is an incredibly modified vehicle. Like, they've done a lot of work on this particular vehicle to adapt it to all the different science things that Jane is doing. You know, we've seen on the roof of the vehicle earlier that when she pops out that she has something attached there. There's things on the sides, all over the interior. So it's very much adapted for specifically her use as a scientist.
Very much like the Ghostbusters tweaked out their hearse, ambulance hearse.
Yeah,
from,
right.
The first film with all the extra, gadgets and hoo-ha and stuff like that, and things that I have seen, of course, for like the Afterlife trailer with even more little things that they've put into the vehicle by that point.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I can definitely see that.
And although I would say that unlike the Ghostbusters vehicle, I have seen people who have created their own versions of those as just, great kind of fan cars that they drive around in.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if the Pinzgauer, if this particular vehicle is quite at the same level of people saying, I want to get my own and retrofit it to look just like Jane's.
If someone did, they'd probably have free admission to every Comic-Con for the rest of time. So,
probably.
Figured out. So they get out, and now we get this like long exchange of looks between Jane and Thor. And I think we had it in the first time we saw the scene, but certainly it wasn't as focused on. My first guess is that Jane is just looking at his horrible eyebrows, but it's probably not what we're going for here. What do you think is actually happening with both of those characters as they're gazing into each other's eyes here?
I was thinking the eyebrows to start as well. I got to say, that is the one pain point for me in revisiting this movie is the fact that they bleached his facial hair so much. It's painful to look at.
Check out the minutes we did with Ashley Coffin a few weeks ago. She's a super fan and also a professional beautician. She had a lot of thoughts on that.
Okay.
Well, and it's to the point where like his beard looks like artificially brown because his eyebrows are so light. I'm like, did they darken his beard? Like, it throws me off every time I look at him because none of it ends up looking right because of that decision that they made, which is it's such a strange decision.
Yeah.
Okay. But I made an offhand joke. I actually do want us to talk about what do you actually think they're talking about as they look at each other.
Yeah. Well, but just to tie into this whole thing, because I think Darcy has a great line right before this where she says, whoa, does he need CPR? Because I totally know CPR. And I think that's such a great line, one, because it speaks so well of the character that Darcy has become, but also it speaks to kind of like this very attractive man that is like laying on the ground here, not the typical sort of person you would expect kind of like stumbling around seemingly drunk in the middle of the desert. And so I think it throws them all that this is actually an attractive person who looks like he's kind of got things together. And so I think that there's an element there, but also then I think, especially when Thor and Jane look into each other's eyes. Now, perhaps it's just because of the comics and we need to have this connection between these two characters, but I don't know. I like this sense of them feeling that connection between the two of them as they look into each other's eyes.
Like literal star-crossed lovers here at this point.
Oh,
just
yeah.
due to the fact that he has fallen from the sky shortly before.
Yeah, and I do wonder with that Darcy line, if maybe in one of the first drafts of a script, she would say, like, does he need mouth to mouth? And then they decided that was just way too on the nose, and so it made it CPR or something like that. Because I think a lot of people would happily volunteer for that. So then he kind of gets to his feet and he starts, demanding hammer. And Darcy responds, of course, we can tell you're hammered. And we've been talking over every minute about how we've sort of set the movie in two different worlds, the world of Earth and the scientists, and then a lot of time on Asgard with the, neo-gods as people on Earth would see them. To me, this was such a great way of kind of establishing that cultural clash of he's saying something that in his context makes total sense, but to Darcy, she just thinks he's talking about being drunk.
That's true. The division that we see in the film is the fact that Thor is also at the kind of a various crux of those types, being able to put his feet in multiple worlds, because here he is on Earth, where, he is seen as a god, but, we had just seen him. I mean, however many minutes ago, we saw him in Jotunheim, where, he's getting his butt kicked a little bit as he's working through the fight with the frost giants. So it sets up a lot of perspective, I think, for the film. And I know some of my friends feel that Thor is, one of the weaker films in the MCU, and possibly even from that first phase. But to me, and I've always been a fan of Thor from the comics. I started reading Thor during Walt Simonson's run back in the mid '80s, when he was doing his Ragnarok cycle. And the Shakespearean level of elevation, of heightened everything in this film, of course, being directed by Kenneth Branagh, just it puts it all in sort of an operatic tone, right? It's where, people now, you can look at all these different MCU films that all fit in different niches, and Thor does actually have a niche, right? It's entirely different tonally than all the other films from the first phase. So I think there's a good reason, to have these characters looking at each other that way, because they're both strange to each other, yet they're both attracted to each other.
And speaking to kind of the whole Kenneth Branagh Shakespearean element, right? I mean, it feels very much, as you said, the star-crossed lovers. This is, to a certain extent, our Romeo and Juliet, right? We have these two characters who come from completely different places. Certainly in the comics, it's definitely more so, where Odin gets very upset that Thor is interested in a woman from Midgard. And so that kind of creates that, the two families sort of thing. And so there's a really interesting element there, but it is also that instant attraction that you have here and connection that does feel operatic, as you were saying. So there is that element that plays, I think, well in this particular context. And I really like that Branagh found a way to kind of bring it out here.
Another genre of movie that I'm probably not going to talk about much on this podcast is rom-coms. I love me a good rom-com. A rom-com is based around the meet cute, and I Hit Him With a Car is a meet cute that's been established before. So yeah, that's a great setup, because, and in some ways that, I think you're right, this movie is a couple of different genres. One of them is kind of that, because I'm thinking this is before Captain America came out. There's a romance that already is happening in Hulk, and Iron Man and Pepper kind of have their thing, but this is the first real movie where the romance is a key part of the movie. So yeah, it kind of makes sense that to make it an actual meet cute.
Yeah, with the earthbound portions, at least in the first and second acts, do have that rom-com style typified with them, with the quirky best friend, and the more lighthearted moments, right? Because when you go back to Asgard and all the flashback pieces and everything like there, it's much, again, operatic. It's much heavier handed, larger than life. And, here on Earth, we're just in this little desert. Yeah. That's a good point.
Well, and it also fits with kind of the whole fish out of water story, right? And not only is it kind of that meet cute here in the rom-com, but it's also with the character who just, I'm not from this place. And it allows her to kind of, in that same rom-com style, she's the one who's also going to kind of help that person figure out how to make sense of this crazy new world that they found themselves in.
Especially because one of the basic tropes of the fish out of water is people think you're crazy or you're drunk because you're ranting about things that make total sense to you, but to them, not so much. And so then we get another series of reaction shots from all four of the people who are here, Jane, Darcy, Eric, and Thor. I want to kind of go through them and talk about what do you think each is thinking. Like Jane, I think we already have kind of talked a little bit about. She has her feelings about him, but now in this moment, it seems she's just focused on the ground and the rune she's about to talk about. What do you get out of what you think Jane is kind of thinking in that moment?
She kind of, I guess you could say the spell is broken, right? As he kind of passes out again. And that's when she's like, where did he come from? And he starts stumbling around. And that is when she, lowers her light and she realizes, there's this this circle of runes that appeared like burned into the ground almost. And that is like, it's like her science brain. And I think it's interesting with the character, the way that they kind of crafted her. She is so focused on her scientific aspects of things, especially in this scene, as we'll see play out, that everything else drops away. And we saw this earlier where she's, Darcy is just like trying to turn away from the quote atmospheric disturbance. And Jane is like grabbing the steering wheel. No, we're going to drive right into that thing. She very much is focused on just on accomplishing her science and is of the mindset to just kind of drop everything else in favor of that science stuff. And so that's definitely an interesting element that we have with her here.
Right. And I think she like puts her arm back a little bit just to kind of keep Eric from stepping in as Thor is wandering around, kicking up the dust in the middle of the circle and everything like that. But yeah, that's basically what I see as well, is that it's interesting to see this cute guy that she accidentally hits with the car, but then, oh my gosh, wait. This is going to make my paper. I'm going to get famous from this. Sorry that I hit this guy, but let's focus on what's really important here.
Yeah. And I love how that's kind of bookended by, Eric saying he got out of the hospital and she's like, yeah, he's fine. I don't think it's because of like genuine concern for him, because all she cares about is this thing. And I kind of love that for her, because I love that she's not presented as just the like perfect hearted. She cares about everyone. Like she's like, okay, hit the guy with the car, but he's okay. Like, I just care about the science now. Then
she's like, all right, you can go, I'll stay.
Next minute, we'll talk about that line in particular a bit, because she doesn't stay.
Yeah, and then Eric, I mean, I think that he has largely seemed fairly confused for the last few minutes. Like when they're chasing this atmospheric disturbance, he's just kind of sitting in the back seat, just kind of looking a little like dumbfounded. I think largely surprised. That's my sense of Eric ever since, Jane brought him here, and he's to look at this atmospheric disturbance that doesn't happen. And then all of a sudden a totally different atmospheric disturbance happens. He seemed very confused about like what's going on. Like, I think that, his world view might be broken a little bit as far as like everything that's happening. Like none of this is making sense now.
Right.
And so I think that's an interesting thing for him, especially as somebody, as we'll learn, who kind of in the story kind of comes from the heritage that would have known about Thor. And so there's an interesting thing about him. It starts making me think, I wonder if he's like having anything, like any bells starting to ring in the back of his head. Like, why is some of this stuff making sense to me?
He seems to be okay with it. Like in the long run, like he's the one that has the least problems with it, as you'll see as you move through the film later. So yeah, maybe right now he is kind of processing this and hearing the things that Thor is saying and kind of starting to put two and two together at this point.
And in some ways that makes sense that he's even more confused, because if you're just looking at a whole bunch of evidence and have no idea where it leads, that you're going to be confused. But if you're leading to evidence that might point to the existence of the childhood myths you heard, and that idea seems completely impossible, and she's rejecting it, like that's even more confusing in some way, because it's like he has a conclusion. And I like that he's the one who is like, we got to get him to a hospital, because to me that's both he cares about the science, but he's maybe a little bit more of an experienced scientist than Jane, so he's able to still keep his eye on the big picture, but also that in a moment of total confusion, like, here's one thing he can understand and can control is we just possibly hurt this person. We should take care of him.
The grown-up of the group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's your take on what's going through Thor's head in this kind of last half of the minute?
I think he's just upset. I mean, he was all of a sudden just cast out, really, like, it's like your dad tells you to go to your room, and then you're just in your room, right? It's like you can't even protest in that. And he's obviously a little dazed, as we see throughout a number of these minutes here. He can be affected by things. You think Thor, and it's like you can smack him with a club and like he'll be okay. But obviously, he did get hit by the car. He gets hit by the car a couple times throughout the film. And he's probably just upset and hurt. And again, just really confused as to what's going on. Why would my father cast me out so?
He's been stripped of all of his powers too, right? I mean, he no longer has the strength. And so when he got hit by the car, that was probably the first time that he actually got hit by something where he kind of felt it, like it actually, really dazed him. And I think that that's an interesting thing because as we'll see over these next few minutes, he still is feeling like he's as powerful as he should be, but he's slowly realizing, why don't I have the strength that I used to have? Why don't I have the ability to handle this?
Just like Superman 2.
Yeah. Very much the same kind of thing. And I love, Jay, the way you phrase it in terms of like sent to your room. Because I can remember when that happened, my father might have said, like, I'm disappointed in you. Here's the thing. Here's what you did wrong. I want you to go think about all this. But the first few minutes, I'm just in my room. I'm not thinking about it at all. I'm just like, I'm angry. I'm in my room.
Yeah, you're in a huff. Yeah.
Yeah. And to me, that's exactly what I got from here. Like, Thor has no shame whatsoever. He's not internalized anything that Odin said. Yeah, and the way he says Heimdall, like, Heimdall, I know you can hear me, open the Bifrost. It's like he thinks this is all a prank. And in just a minute, they're going to say, oh, we're just kidding, Thor. Of course not.
Yeah. Lesson learned. Right. Exactly.
And he's not a party Thor anymore. So.
Yeah. No. Right. Well, it's funny because, like, I suppose there had been instances, I don't know, I'm assuming this, but where royalty, like, they had actually, for whatever reason, cast a child out. Like they said, you're not, I mean, I assume it came from somewhere where, somebody was not living up to their stature as a part of the family, or maybe, certainly in the case where, views differed and one person was believing one thing and one was the other, and they would cast out a family member. But in the process of getting cast out in those sorts of situations, like, they've got to hop on a horse and they have to kind of go through the whole process of leaving the country or whatever the case may be. In the case of this, it's like he gets cast out, he gets hit, blasted into the Bifrost by Mjolnir. We don't know how long the Bifrost trip is. It's, it could be a very short trip. It could take, minutes, who knows. But regardless, it is suddenly like, he's thrust into an entirely different situation. He doesn't know he's going to Midgard. He just knows he was kind of blasted through the Bifrost and ended up here. And so I can imagine, like, kind of the general kind of cloudy confusion that he has here. It's like, everything just literally changed. And I need to get a sense of where I am because I just don't have a handle on it at this moment. And
he may have a concussion.
And he could have a concussion, right?
Which is something, again, he wouldn't be used to because, he's gotten thrown around by frost giants and not had any problem. So I think that's about where we're going to wrap up. Jane, as we talked about, says, she recognizes that that he should go to the hospital, but she still doesn't want to leave. You go, I'll stay. And then he starts to just speak a sentence that we'll talk about in the next minute. Is there any other kind of last points from this minute that either one of you wanted to bring up?
Just that, yeah, it's like the first time that he's now focusing on them, other than kind of like the dreamy look at Jane when he kind of, it's almost like this, who's this angel standing here sort of thing. It's like he almost doesn't remember that there are other people here. And so it is that very last moment here in this minute that we'll talk about largely in the next one, when suddenly he like turns his attention to them. And so it's, I like the fact that it's like that moment. And I guess in a weird way, that does speak to, as we've been talking about Thor quite a bit over the course of the film, like, he doesn't recognize anybody who's not like princely or kind of royal status as somebody to pay attention to, right? They're just there as to point to you, and that's kind of very much the way he is here. Like from his perspective, these may as well all be servants.
To put it in modern language, he's being very much a Karen right now. Apologies to any Karens in our audience.
I like that every opportunity that the filmmakers got with Zach Stentz and Don Payne, the screenwriters, and Ashley Miller, they gave Darcy something funny to do to really make her stand out. But it's not just funny lines for funny lines' sake. It really does provide character moments for her. Which is why I think she has become such a fan favorite character. I mean, the CPR line that you mentioned earlier, I think is a great example, and we'll see some other ones here in the next few minutes that we're talking about this, and which is why it's fun seeing her showing up on
WandaVision.
Yeah, and on What If even so.
Yeah. No, I think it's so true. One of the reasons why I was most excited to go back and do this is because she was, I thought, one of the real breakout stars of the WandaVision TV show. And it made me really want to go back and kind of see her beginnings as well. So it's fun to see that they're treating her like the quirky best friend, but they're not having her just say whatever's relevant in the moment. She's a bit of an exposition machine, and we'll get to that in a couple of days, because I think it's great how they handle it. But also, yeah, she has a fully formed character in a way that I think really stands out. Yeah. Well, great. We have so much more to talk about, obviously, the next couple of minutes, over the next couple of days. I'm really looking forward to that. Jay, for people who are hearing about you for the first time, they want to know more, how can they find you and your work?
Well, you can check out mculocationscout.com, which catalogs all of the filming locations and real-world locations, or in-universe locations for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, including the TV shows on Disney+. I got as much as I could for Shang-Chi in there by taking some clips from different trailers. It's actually surprising how much of the studio work was actually in the trailers. I also have a series of podcasts over at retrozap.com, part of our superhero suite of podcasts, including the titular show, Superhero Suite, and our other show that we're starting back up here in a couple weeks, Scarlet Velocity, a Flash podcast. And I also do some articles over there on sci-fi movies called Sci-Fi Saturdays, and then through October I did the 31 Days of Horror, which are bookmarked there. You can check those out.
Awesome. Well, great stuff to look into. I'm excited to hear you did some of Shang-Chi, because after we're done recording, I may go check out if you figured out the question of where Ta Lo is in regard to Kunlun, because I have no idea. And I've been very curious for a while. So thank you so much for being a part of this. Annie, as always, thank you so much. And all of our fans, thank you so much. We got a really exciting week ahead of us. Have a good day.
Until next time, true believers.
Marvel Movie Minute is a production of True Story FM, engineering by Andy Nelson. This season's music is One Last Ride by Martin Puringer. Find the show at truestory.fm. And if your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, consider doing that for this show.